In this Holy Gospel, so familiar to us, we clearly see the humanity as well as the divinity of Christ. It was because of this great miracle, the greatest so far in the life of the Lord, his earthly life. It was because of this miracle now that the scribes and the Pharisees will plot more and more to have Jesus put to death. And as the Gospel tells us in another spot, they were going to put Lazarus to death as well to seal the deal, so to speak. This is not the resurrection of Lazarus. This is the raising of Lazarus, or the resuscitation of Lazarus, because Lazarus died again later on, and the body that was raised by Jesus was merely the body of Lazarus resuscitated, unlike the glorified, resurrected body of Christ at his resurrection. And so we can ask the question, why did Jesus allow Lazarus to die? He could have cured Lazarus without even going to see Lazarus, had he chose. But he did so, as the evangelist tells us, St. John, in order that the power and the glory of God might be seen. And so Jesus hears his friend is sick. He delays on purpose. And when he gets there, he knows Lazarus is dead. And Martha comes out to meet him, says, "Lord, if you had been here, my brother would not have died." She puts faith already in his divine power. And Jesus reveals himself then as the resurrection and the life in the question and answer that go back and forth between Jesus and Martha. Of course, the curious crowd is gathering as well. They're probably very dubious. After all, the man had been dead 4 days. There was no such thing as embalming, and certainly Martha says, "By now, Lord, the body is going to stink. There's a stench. He's been dead for 4 days. Jesus, not put off at all. But St. John says something very human, so to speak. The shortest phrase, at least in the Latin Gospel, Jesus flavit. Jesus wept. His humanity comes through. He knows he's going to raise Lazarus. He knows that this death is not the final chapter of this story of his friendship with Lazarus. And yet St. John is so clear that Jesus wept. He showed us it's all right to mourn. And after he weeps, he gets up and he calls out. He has the voice now of God, "Lazarus, come out." And imagine the amazement of that crowd when a man who had been dead and buried for 4 days walks out of the tomb. And of course, St. John says, many became to believe in him who wouldn't. Except the scribes and the Pharisees, of course, because the way they understood things was being threatened by Jesus, who was not the Messiah that they had anticipated. And so, my brothers and sisters, this raising of Lazarus should strengthen our faith in the Lord's own resurrection. Why were the disciples so amazed after the Lord's death when they saw him resurrected, realizing he had this divine power? Again, the human doubts that's in. How could this be the Lord? They saw him crucified. They saw him scourged. They saw him crowned with thorns. They saw him die on the cross. They saw his side pierced with a lance. And yet, on Easter Sunday, he stands before them, not resuscitated, but with a resurrected, glorified body. In a way now, in his human nature, he can never suffer again. And so this is the hope that is held out to us. This is the cornerstone of our faith, the resurrection of Christ. And yet we doubt. We all doubt. If anyone in here says they never doubted how the Lord could be raised from the dead, I'd be very surprised, because times come and things happen in life and doubts come into my own mind. If all of this is true, then how can there be so much of this things in the world that are evil and death and suffering and all that? And yet we have to keep on reassuring ourselves by the words of the Holy Gospel, by these eyewitnesses who saw Christ, that indeed he is resurrected. And so in our doubt, we replace our doubt with faith and hope in what Christ has accomplished for us. Let us redouble our efforts of strengthening our faith during this Passiontide. The devil works hard. He works very hard to cast seeds of doubt and discord and despair and hopelessness, all these things which are contrary to the hope given to us by God, our hope in our faith and what Christ has accomplished, and more specifically, our hope and faith in the life to come. During these final days of Lent, let us rededicate ourselves to Christ, to the reality of his being raised from the dead by the power of God the Father Almighty. And in this spirit, let us live our lives with conviction and with a strong faith.